Morning, everybody. Um, yeah, so I set a timer, so I'm locked in 50 minutes, cutting myself off. Wherever I'm at, it's just gonna stop. I'm gonna be like, that's it, we're done. Let's do Q&A because I want to make sure there's time for that. I don't want to go over my time and push back later things. Yeah, so I do want to take just a minute and like thank like everybody really, because I know it takes a lot of work for like all of us to get here have been through a lot and like made a lot of changes and efforts just to be here. And that's why this is even happening, is that people enrolled and signed up and came here and flew here to do this. So thank you all for being here, just like making this week happen. But obviously, especially Katerina and Risto and everybody in the kitchen who's like making our food and organizing absolutely everything. Like this just wouldn't be happening really without them. And like Katerina, I don't know, this incredible like energy and motivation to keep this going. We all really appreciate it. And just like on a personal note, like I don't know, like SMR feels like a good, I don't know, like a place where I feel like welcome. I feel like I've kind of jumped ship on philosophy a little bit. Like I've just fallen overboard and they're like, can't pick me up because they're like, oh, we got a Derrida panel at 2. We can't get Thomas. Well, he'll figure it out. And I'm just out there. And SMR is just like this other boat that's nice to be in for a while, that's filled with lots of people that aren't philosophers and, philosophers too, but people who are, I don't know, maybe fell off the boat at some point as well. In any case, yeah, thank you for all that. And I recognize, okay, so my talk is like different. And I would never even try to present this at some place like SPEP, the Society for Phenomenology and Extension. That's like my disciplinary conference, which I haven't been to in a long time. Like I really fell off of that. But I would never present this and they would be like, what are you even doing, Tom? What does this have to do with anything? This is not even philosophy. It's kind of fair. And I gotta say that like it's been a very fun project. The first slide, there's just one slide dedicated to like where I've been and how I got here. There's more to the story, but I'm going to try to make it concise of like how I ended up in such a weird place, like not even really doing philosophy and kind of losing all the vocabulary I've like spent, a decade learning how to use. And now I can't use it anymore because the text and the time periods, like they don't even use those words and it doesn't make any sense. And I'm sorry if even the talk itself is, maybe you'll be like, well, is this like, and you're going to want to use words like nature and ontology and epistemology. You're going to want to say those things. And then I just apologize in advance because my face is going to do this. Like, because the materials and time periods that I'm working with, that's just not the vocabulary. And it's not fair to use those words to think about what's happening here. So I'm sorry that most of your intuitions about what's going on might be like I might raise a little eyebrow, or if like no, that's not what that is, that, and then you're going to be annoyed, and I'm sorry because but that's my experience is I basically don't know what I'm just in another world where there's just I don't know how to say, like it's hard. I've had to just reframe everything I've thought, which is exciting but also an enormous amount of work. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so this is yeah, and also I have to apologize because I know the thing is on like physis and nature. And then my whole talk is like, there's no such thing as nature. Moving on. And I'm sorry, like I'm not doing it to be like I don't mean it in any like big way of just like I don't like this thing, so I'm going to talk about it. No, it's not like that. There just really is no such thing as it's an invention, it's a historical invention. But the time period that I'm working with, no one ever believed in nature. It's a historical invention of a certain time and a place and a certain dude who made it up. And after, but there's no textual record. There's worlds. I mean, most of human history, nobody has ever had the idea of nature. Nobody ever thought, oh, nature. Like that's just not a thing. It's not a meaningful word. And so again, I'm not going to judge you if you use the word nature to talk about some stuff because it's hard. Like I find myself using the word because like an Indo-European modern language, I'm just struggling to use words here to talk about what they're talking about. But just to be clear, there is no nature. They're not talking about that. And this is what's going on before there's nature. Okay, so this is the world before nature. So that's the context of this paper. Okay, and already it won't advance. Yes. Okay. This is the very quick background where I'm coming from. I mean, it's when I look at like I just feel ridiculous. It was showing you this right now because it just is like, this is an obsessed man. What is wrong with this person who has spent a decade on one question? Like back to John's quote from Bergson, every philosopher will just really spend their whole life trying, not answering, trying to ask one question, one idea. I think I really only have one idea, and it's just like I never feel done with it. It never feels like, I always feel like I'm starting it again somehow. But that is movement. And so I've spent the last decade just studying this. I mean, with just a simple question of like, what even is it? Okay. But then the other question of like, why have Europeans like really hated this thing? Like, why don't European, I mean, just to Katerina's talk, which did a good job of saying why, philosophers have really not been able to grapple with movement. Not that they don't acknowledge its existence, but just they explain it by something else. It's never the thing. They can't just leave it at that. Like things move. Yes, but why? You're like, okay, well, okay. And then they need some other explanation, God and laws of physics. And, there's some other explanation. Nobody's satisfied to just keep with movement because it's just like, well, that's the thing to be explained. What did you think we were doing anyway? In other words, philosophy's been dedicated to explaining away movement by some other kind of thing. And that's just in some ways the history of philosophy. But it's taken a long time to get there. And like the last decade has just been me kind of working through that Euro-Western tradition, trying to understand why Europeans hate movement so much and why they, fear and have this relationship to matter and motion. And so that was this kind of first thing was like, that's all this is like, why are they so freaked out? And what have they done to try to get rid of movement? And then sort of alongside that, I found some allies in Lucretius Marx and Virginia Woolf, who I just kind of feel, I mean, there's lots of weirdos inside the tradition, but these are like the weirdos for me who recognize something, not just, and I've read, like, I read a lot around to find those figures and taught classes for a long time, trying to figure out, are there any people inside of the Euro-Western tradition that have like essentially a kind of really heretical view about movement. And Wolff and Marx kind of get it directly from Lucretius. He's sort of the first with the idea of the swerve because it's indeterminacy. That's the characterization. That's weird. You can't go there because that's basically saying things move and change, like full stop. Okay, but how do you explain all of that? No, you don't explain it. Like that's just where you live is a world that's moving and changing all the time without another explanation of why that happens. Right? The swerve occurs, indeterminate time, indeterminate place. Like, okay. And that, I mean, who's okay with that? I mean, so then people reinterpret Lucretius to try to get, like alter his explanation, be like, oh, well, that's freedom and the soul and God, like all kinds of things to try to get away from that problem. Okay, so that was all those things. But now I'm on to something else. And it's a big difference. So this has been just like part one. I don't know if there'll be a part three, so don't ask. Like, I mean, this might be it. I'd be like, okay, I'm out of ideas. After I finish part two, it's just, no, that was it. That's as far as this went. At this point, I just kind of feel like I'll be like, I don't know, 80 years old, still being like, yes, but I still haven't figured out, there needs to be like a part, whatever, but anyway, we're on part two right now, which is a big break. The first part was all philosophy of movement. And I'm not saying like I don't do philosophy of movement anymore. It's just that's not the focus because philosophy just isn't the focus. And I'll explain why I got here really quickly, which is kind of Lucretius. Because he was so influential for Marx and Wolff, who both attributed to him this idea of the swerve and the indeterminacy of movement and matter. I was like, well, where did he get it? I mean, surely he didn't just invent this out of nowhere. Lucretius got it from somewhere. Where did he get it? Well, he didn't get it from the philosophers because there aren't any philosophers before him who affirm the indeterminacy, like affirm the indeterminacy. Aristotle's like, and there's protehule, moving on. And, but it's not like an affirmation. It's like a rejection of like, we can't work with that nonsense. And Lucretius is like, yes, but we can, and we can make a whole world because that is the world of the poets. That is the world of the gods. And that's the world that influenced Lucretius. And so I went back to Hesiod and then Homer and I was like, oh, wow, like there is this, I mean, in this idea of chaos in Hesiod, there really is a kind of indeterminacy. He's not caught up in the same kinds of problematics because he's not yet a philosopher. Philosophy hasn't yet been invented in Greece. And then I realized, actually, you know what? This is all over the world. This is not just Hesiod. This is not just Homer. This is like the world, their world of the prior to the 6th century BC, 8th century, 7th century. That world and before is their world in which there is no nature, there is no ontology, there's no epistemology, and there is chaos at the core of things. And so I was like, oh, that is a crazy world. But because here's the thing is, and how it's tied to movement is chaos is always moving in every one of these stories. that's what I want to kind of present to you today. And it's crazy. Like, I mean, it's hard enough to even get through one paper, in a talk, but I'm like trying to condense the findings of two books. So this is like thousands and thousands of hours I've spent doing this. Again, the embarrassing obsession of all this, how many thousands of hours. I went to a talk one time and the scholar like told us how many, like that this paper I delivered to you, like, and she had calculated out, this took me 1,000 hours to write. I mean, it wasn't a fantastic paper. So I was like, oh my God, that was, like that's crazy. That 1,000 hours. But then I reflected on my own. I was like, oh my God, how many hours have I spent on like things that I was like, that was like one little footnote or something. Like, how many hours did it take me to get to that? And then I felt like embarrassed for myself. And I don't know, maybe for all of us that we spend so many thousands of hours. And if you ever reveal that to somebody, they'd be like, wow, that's like, you're like pathological. Something has gone wrong with you that you spent 1,000 hours on that, Okay. So anyway, this is like just embarrassing how many thousands of hours. Okay. But the point is that, this is a different project. I'm trying to condense two book projects, and then there's a whole series at the end that I'll talk about. But it's going to take the next, I think, I've over been a few years into it, so I'm going to say about 7 more years. This will be the thing. Like this took 10 years. The next one will take, I think, I'm just estimating maybe 10 years. I don't know. But it's going to consume, it's a big project. It's not like one paper or thing. I mean, I could keep going, but I think it's going to come to some kind of close after about, 6 volumes. Okay. So anyway, that's where we're at. Let's talk about chaos and the birth of chaos. The birth of chaos. It is about birth. That's important. That's not just like a title that, sounded cool. I had originally written this investigation about the nature of chaos, looking in the world's oldest cosmogonies. I had originally gone about that, thinking about chaos and writing just from my philosophical background and tradition, being like, the ontology, the epistemology. I was using all these words from the Euro-Western tradition, and by the end of the book, I was like, oh my God, like I'm an idiot. What have I done? And these words are nowhere in the text that I've been working with. And I really felt like my own difficulty coming to these texts with the vocabulary I had did not seem appropriate. This was not what they were talking about. Now, I don't just mean terminologically. I mean, really, this is really not what they're talking about. And so that's both exciting. I don't know if you're like this, but I just like really get kind of hooked on being like wrong, like not in some superficial Wikipedia wrong way, but like deeply wrong. Like it makes me really excited to find out that I've been like really disoriented and that like actually everything's upside down. You're like, oh yeah, that's cool. And then there's like a whole other world and you're like, oh my God, like everything I thought before was actually like it's there, but in a totally other way. So I really like that. But it gets harder, like a harder high to achieve. In graduate school, you just go to the next seminar and you're like, Merleau-Ponty has a whole new world. And you're like, oh, but Deleuze has got a whole new world. And then you keep going and going, and then Laruelle has got, and then after that, you're like, well, where's the next one? When is it going to happen? And then it gets harder and harder. So this is like my like seeking after that. You're like, yes, but what if we just like go back farther and farther in time and we're not even in philosophy land? What if we're in a totally different world where there are no philosophers and it doesn't even exist? And like, yeah, okay, so that's where we're at. Okay, so I'm not going to use the word ontology. If you do, I might go, but I also get it. But I am going to use this word cosmogony. I know it's Greek. It can't capture the whole world of ways of thinking about what we're talking about. Which you're like, what are we talking about, Thomas? You haven't even said what we're fucking talking about. Okay, well, I'm getting to this point, but if I don't get the terminology right, you're going to be like, what do you mean by that? The quick vocabulary distinction here. I'm choosing the word cosmogony because even though it's Greek, it's an archaic. These are archaic Greek roots. Cosmos. I mean, it means world, but it also has this meaning of like decoration or something that's beautiful. And then Timaeus and Socrates like dresses up and and it's described as like the cosmeme. He's like got cosmetics and he's like kind of performing the cosmos in the way in the dramatics of the dialogue. Okay, cosmology. What is it? Cosmos plus logos. It's just like cosmology is like the study of the cosmos, the kind of lay of the cosmic land. If you're doing cosmology, you're like describing the furniture of the world, more or less. What's in it? Cosmogony. So that's cosmos plus Genesis. The other word that's it does exist, but it's less used, which is cosmogony. Turns out it just means the same thing as cosmogony, and also really from the same roots, but like just a weird moment in linguistic history where there's two different words that mean the exact same thing and one just won out somehow. Yeah, cosmogony. Basically, it's the genesis of the cosmos. Genesis here, birth. That's, it coming into being. It has to do with birth. That's like a really key difference. I'd say one of the most fundamental differences. So it links together all the next series of books are all about the birth of chaos, the birth of order, the birth of truth, blah, 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 blah. That's about the birth, the way in which those things are born. Why is being born important? Because importantly, it comes out of something else. So that idea, and that makes it sort of imminent, related to what came before, carrying it over in a different way. That's what birth is about kinship, genealogy, and there's lots of other resonances. But that's quite different from, for example, Yahweh. He's just not born. Yahweh he's like just there floating above the water. And you're like, well, what about Tehom? No, nothing about being born from Tehom. He's just floating above the waters out of nothing. Okay. Creation story. Like if you say creation, I'm not talking about, although cosmogony is a kind of creation, but there's lots of creations. The creation of the hand axe, the creation of like weaving, the creation of boats and creation of humans. There are creation stories, but there's a lot of them. It just means something got created. That's all that means. Cosmogony is specific because it means the birth of the cosmos. And if you already have a cosmos and stuff is being born in it, that's not a cosmogony. That's because that's not explaining the birth of the cosmos. If you've already got sky and earth, the question is, well, where did those come from? That's cosmogony, is where did sky and earth, where did the cosmos come from? Where did the stuff inside of it come from are different stories. Next word, I wish I had coined it. Like when you come up with a word and then you're like, oh, this is like perfect. This is genius. How have I come to this conclusion? And then you look it up and it's like, oh, actually somebody already like had that like years before, And it's even funny because I had read the book where it came from originally, totally forgotten that word existed, reinvented it in my imagination, and then discovered that I had, basically taken it, apparently, but without realizing it. Anyway, the point is, it's a great word, chaosmogony. Chaosmogony. That is when the cosmos is born from chaos, primordial chaos. And that means chaos comes first. Nothing else is co-equal with it. It's primordial. Last word is chaos, and this one could go on forever. But it turns out like just exciting moments where everything you think is wrong. Everything I thought I knew about mythology is just wrong. Like it was just wrong. And that's fun to find out that you're like just over and over again wrong about the things you think about what this world is like. And one of them is chaos. This word, I'll be very brief. Hesiod uses it, nobody else. Okay, in the world. It's a Hesiod specific word. He is the first record that we have of that word. And when you look in etymology dictionaries, don't be fooled. Some like on the surface, people repeat stories about what this word means. Like, oh, it comes from chasm. It comes from these other words. Maybe. If you look at the footnotes in the etymology dictionary, we actually don't know. Why don't we know? Because Hesiod was the first one to use it. He never defined it. And he just uses it only like 3 times. One and only really kind of like in very liminally meaningful words. You have to understand the context that he uses it to understand what he is doing with it. And then even the ancients debate, what was he talking about? And then they all have different versions. Like, well, chaos meant this, it meant space, it meant blah, then they have all these ideas. I don't want to get into Hesiod, but if you have Hesiod questions, we can talk about it. I'm just going to say nobody really knows what this word means, which is kind of cool, actually. But just whatever you think chaos means, just like throw that out temporarily. Like whatever things you think, like in a dictionary or whatever, we have no idea what this word means. So just back up before you think you have any idea of what this word means. Okay. Methodology. I just wanted to know what chaos was. My hunch was it was moving and that it was tied to this is the punchline of like what is this all about, Thomas, and why are you talking about this? Because chaos was, I suspected, always moving, and that there was in some ways a primacy of movement in the world, like around the world, in the ancient and archaic world, and possibly even like well before that into the Neolithic and maybe before, but it's hard to gather evidence for that. That movement was just always understood to be primary. That humans around the world came to this conclusion independently that the world is moving, and that is fundamental and not explainable by anything else. The thing in the European tradition that I was like, why can't anyone admit this, is actually like just nearly universal in the text before. That is a really big, that's what I was looking for. But I was like, well, what even is chaos? Like nobody even knows. Let's look at the text and find out. This is the point where I cannot give you the evidence, and I'm sorry. And you can feel suspicious about that. You can be like, Thomas, I haven't seen a single quote from Egyptian or Sumerian anything in your thing. I know, but that's like thousands of hours, tons of textual things that you wouldn't really, we would never get anywhere if we just started looking at the texts. I have to, what I'm presenting to you now, you can just bracket and say, let's just say that the work you did is more or less accurate. Okay, and then like, what are the implications, blah, blah, blah. But I'm sorry, like, I can't think of a way around that problem of just bear with me, because I can't prove to you these things right now. I can just say, I spent a lot of time, wrote 2 books, and I think that I've shown these things to be true in the text. Like, not like I've interpreted them, but like, when you look at the text, they say these words, and these are the findings that I'm about to share with you. But I have to tell you why I selected the text that I did, because it turns out that this is like a really crazy thing to even try to do. And it's ridiculous. I thought I could even try to do it. And I had moments where I was like, no, this is not possible. I give up. But which is the world of mythology. Okay, Thomas, you're going to like read everything in the world, all world mythology, and then try to like deduce some common features of it. Good luck with that. So I like just started with the old ones like Egypt and Sumer and, China. I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to like be able to do this. And then I was like, oh, actually, I'm never going to finish this project because it's too big. But it turns out that when you look at the collected myths of the world, only a few of those texts are actually the following things. And these are my qualifiers, okay? The text that I am talking about here, these are the oldest texts. Okay, these are the oldest cosmogonies, specifically cosmogonies. We have old texts. They are not cosmogonies. So all old texts that are not cosmogonies are not included. The world's oldest cosmogonies written in their native language. Okay, so and you might say like, well, of course they're written. No, they're not. It's like 99% of world mythology is written by colonial anthropologists and missionaries. Okay, we might have this sensitivity. We're like, well, that's crazy. But anthropologists like quote this stuff like crazy. Comparative mythologists are like, oh yeah, we've got all these cases from all these people. And it's like, dude, what are you talking about? That was like a Jesuit missionary. After 500 years of colonialism in Africa, you collected this story in your own words. What are you talking about? That's not a serious primary source. I mean, I'm not saying we should throw it away. It's just a different kind of source. We need to treat it in a different way. So these are the sources, which are native language. So this is pre-colonial or uncolonized texts before the 20th century. Because after the 20th century, things just get really complicated. It's just complicated, and not in a bad way. I'm not saying other texts that don't fit this are like bad or not good. You just need a different kind of methodology to treat them, because you're dealing with like layers and layers of syncretism and hybridization and colonization, and it's just more challenging. And I do not feel that I can do that. But I'm just trying to be honest about what I think I can do with the research sets. Okay, so it turns out also that this was a project worth doing because nobody had done it before. Nobody, even though you might have heard people, and you might even feel to yourself like, oh yeah, the old ancient, cosmogonies, chaos is really important. And that's more or less what you get from the literature is people like, it's an important thing, and they give a couple examples. But that's not a serious scholarly study. That's just like an intuition guided by a couple pieces of the text. And that's not even like, I'm not just saying chaos is there somewhere and plays some kind of role. What I'm saying is that in all of these, the qualifiers here, nobody has treated all of those texts, and it turns out there's only 12 of them. So suddenly the thousands of mythological things turned out to be, there's only 12 that deal with this question, the oldest cosmogonies in the world written in the native language. Okay. Moving on. So those are the texts that I've looked at. What are we talking about here? Prior to the 6th century BCE. Why the 6th century? You may be familiar with this term, the axial age. It's kind of messy. It's got lots of stuff going on in it. Whatever. We can talk about the axial age if you want. But around the 6th century BCE, and there are a couple of exceptions, something very big happens in Eurasia where you get, I mean, the story of the axial age is like the first enlightenment, the ancient enlightenment. There's kind of two axial ages and enlightenments, the ancient enlightenment, you know, the emergence of philosophy and religion and blah, blah, blah. And then the second enlightenment of like the European, you know, whatever, 18th century enlightenment kind of stuff. These are the texts that are written prior to the 6th century BC. So these are like the oldest substratum of Eurasian cosmogony. So Egyptian, Sumerian, Indian, Greek, Chinese. So those are like the big five texts before then. I mean, I'm just listing all the 12 texts that I've gotten into, and what the claims that I'm making are all about these. And then these are the traditions that exist in this way after the 6th century BCE, but of course before the 20th. Okay, this is like the 4 things I learned from like the whole book. So I'm condensing it down to these things. One of them is when you, and I was just looking at the beginnings, the primordial beginnings in all these stories. All of them, all 12 of them, were chaosmogonies, meaning that chaos is always first. Do they use the exact word chaos? No, right? Because that's Hesiod's word. They use other words. But when you look at all the other words, be like, okay, well, what was it like in the very primordial beginnings? It was the following: formless, fluid, dark, moving. The moving thing, that's what got me into this. And I was like, oh, actually, there's more than just movement, really. That is part of the primordial beginnings. It's moving, but it's importantly dark, indeterminate, creative. And I should put destructive. So these are the 6 features common to all of these 12. These are the oldest substratum. They all have these 6 in common. Okay, that's what, when I use the word chaos, why am I using it? Why am I stuck on the Greek words? I don't know, just maybe to talk to you all in European languages. And it's a word that means something a little bit, because I can't just use all the words of all these cultures all at once. So we're just going to go with this one. All right. So it's just heuristic. I'm not attached to this word in any way. These 6 things I am attached to. And it was a lot of work, and nobody had ever collected that. Nobody looked at the primary language texts in their original language. So there's a lot of translation work, which was very challenging, but also rewarding when you find like this one word that, you know, some scholar just completely translated out of the passage. And then you're like, oh, actually, that's like really important. Like the fact that, you know, in the very beginning, it was like indeterminate, and there's a word that means indeterminate, you know, in Egyptian, and they just left that word out because it didn't fit their particular idea of what they thought the Egyptian beginning should be like. But in any case, those are the 6 features, okay? Of that, if that's what I mean when I say chaos. They also had very similar forms of genesis. So chaos is in the very beginning. What comes out of it? What are the first things? Like, how does chaos give birth to order? And the answer is roughly the things that first come out. The very first things are spiraled, they're mounded, vegetal, and hot. So across all 12 texts, these are all common. The snake motif is like a really recurrent, like that's in all of them except just a couple Polynesian ones. So that one I thought was going to be in all of them, but just because of geographical region, snakes didn't play a huge role. In any case, that's important because that's the shape of the cosmos. This is like the shape and the way the cosmos looks. Part of the sections and all the chapters, because I was very curious, we're looking at the oldest texts, but what about the Neolithic non-textual archaeological evidence right before those texts? Did they? Because what you're getting, if you're getting a story that's written down, it means it was already in the oral tradition for thousands of years before that, probably. Some version or variation of it. These are old stories, like really, really old stories. These are the oldest stories that we have in the world. Just looking at the text, it's a cue that whatever happened before was being recorded down. And so then I looked at the Neolithic evidence for what? Right? Trying to find any connection to the cosmogonic story. And that was spirals and water. This is like almost around the world. That's like always water, the little like wavy lines. And these are Nakata 2 Egyptian pottery pieces. So like in Egyptian burials, like, you know, okay, Nakata 2 is pre-dynastic, just, you know, FYI. But when you get buried, this is what you're buried with, a spiral. Like, I mean, look at that spiral. It's not a small spiral either. That's like, I know where I'm going, when I die, which is, back into I mean, because the Egyptian cosmos is born from chaos, and almost all these stories, the world is born and the world dies. That's really important. That is what keeps the system imminent, if you will. And now what happens after it dies and returns to chaos? The texts don't say. None of these texts say. And that's very important, that there's a kind of indeterminacy at the source of things. Maybe it will be born again. Maybe it will not be born again. It's not a salvation narrative. There's no redemption. And that's fine. That's not even a question. Salvation hasn't been invented yet. There is no salvation story prior to the 6th century BCE. Nobody's getting saved and going to. Okay. The point is that there's lots of Neolithic evidence right before this that those images of water and the spiral, which are connected, they're always connected with chaos. Those are present. And burial pottery is significant. People don't just get buried with anything. It's important pieces that show some relation to the rest of the cosmos, and people are tied to it. Okay. Chaos is always removed. I mean, maybe that's obvious now because we're living in all this. And it's clear that chaos, has been removed from this story a long time ago. So in all of the chapters, what I tried to trace was the precise moment. We get text where chaos comes first, and then you track the exact textual moment and the place and the time where the text next comes where chaos is not there. Or chaos is like this evil serpent goddess, who needs to be slain. I mean, like any dragon killing story, it's like it's the calling card. You know where chaos has been killed when you get like the serpent goddess who's evil and needs to be slayed, and the dragon that needs to, whatever. Any dragon that, any snake slaying. Snakes aren't bad. Why would snakes and blackness be bad? Like, just on the face of it, it's not obvious. I mean, okay, snakes can be poisonous or whatever, but when you look at the record, it's like, it's not. I mean, snakes play a crazy amount of roles prior to the decline of chaos. In any case, I've tracked all the times and places where chaos is declined in the literature, and it always does. Okay, that's why we're living in what we have, because chaos has been removed from the narrative. We no longer live in a world where chaos came first, because if we did, everything would be different than it was, and it would be much more similar to what it was like prior to this. So in the worlds of chaos, and a lot of other changes happen alongside that. I can't get into it because it'll raise all kinds of other things that we don't have time to talk about. But it's a world-changing thing that happens. That it's not arbitrary when these things happen. That it's a cosmogonic, absolutely world-shifting change when chaos is removed. And even Hesiod is like a stage of removal, actually, away from Homer. But we can get to that. In any case, it's always disappeared around the 6th century. In Sumer in Egypt, it's 1500 BCE. Chaos is removed from the story. And then everywhere else in Eurasia, it's after the 6th century BCE. And then after that, it's just footnotes to colonialism. Europeans go around the world just murdering and killing chaos and people and everything. The story is more evidenced at that point, and it's clear that wherever the Christians go, chaos dies. I mean, you can predict it. And then the texts are there because the Christians took a very good record of the murder. We burned this many natives, this many texts, we destroyed this many. They will never go back. So they know they've recorded that for us really obviously. But in Egypt, 1500 BCE, nobody is exactly has that same feeling of colonization. So it's harder to track down that moment. Okay, whatever. Oh, the resolution on this is bad, but I got to tell you, if you get a chance to look at some Zhao Dynasty bronze, it's insane. It just goes for miles and miles. You look into it, you can just zoom and zoom and zoom. It's just like spirals within spirals within spirals and spirals. Okay, next book. The The Birth of Order. Okay, so now again, same deal. Bracket any idea that you have of what order is, because it's not like that in this world. Order does not mean what you think it is, whatever that is. Let me explain. It's about the emergence of order from chaos. So this is the next step. After we understand what chaos looks like, what does order look like when it comes out of chaos? Order looks like two different things. When order comes first in the cosmos, it looks one way. I mean, it's and that's the transcendent metaphysical, where'd that order come from? Shut up. And so you just have transcendent order, and it's fixed and it's static. And that is, again, what Katerina said, that's just the history of philosophy, more or less. There's some kind of fundamental order. What is it? Okay, no, there's not a fundamental order. We never get to that. It comes out of chaos in all these stories. But then what does that mean? Like, how does order is that just like this miraculous thing out of chaos? No, it looks like very specific things. Number one, in all these 12 texts, order is always born from chaos. Okay. Light is always born from darkness, not the other way around. Like, you're in an enlightenment period where like light came first or something like that. That's like, because that's just not what humans have thought for the vast majority of before that time period. And suddenly in the enlightenment, like, what if light came first? Okay, then you live in a totally different, that little difference is indicative of a massive difference. Um, Iterative order. Okay, what do I mean by iteration? Just differential repetition, repeats, but differently. Takes from the past, modifies, moves forward in a slightly different way. When order is born from chaos, it always, in all these texts, looks like iteration. It's not static. It's not a law. I mean, you might be thinking, I don't know what you're thinking, but I'm reacting in some ways against the mythological tradition. They're like, that treats, when order comes out of chaos, the story is that it's usually chaos has to be murdered and then order can be enforced. But that is not the story here. It's not a law. It's not nature. Okay, the order of things is not an order. It's not fixed. It's not static, and it's certainly not nature. It appears in these patterns: spirals, branches, genealogy, which is essentially branches. When things give birth to other things and so on. So it produces a tree. Right. Plants, animals, humans, gods. I forget what that's about. Okay. The way. So you've heard this, if you've seen The Mandalorian, I don't know, the way, this is the way. It's not that kind of, in that story, like they've just misunderstood everything about the way, it's like the way, like, or, like the way of Christ or whatever, it's like Christ's way or the highway. I mean, that sense of the way is like, there is one way. That is not what way had ever meant before. This is a word that, okay, aesthetics, epistemology, those are not words in this text. Way is absolutely a word in all these texts, and it's very important because the cosmic order of things proceeds by paths. It proceeds by ways. What's the way? Well, if you've ever read the Tao Te Ching, you're never going to get an answer to that question from that book. If you're reading, you'd be like, I'm trying to figure out what the way is. No, then you're never going to get there from there. It's not a way, right? It's all around. I mean, it is the way that things are going is not a single way. It's not fixed. Okay, so it's paths, it's tracks, it moves, it's branches, it travels, it leads, it follows. That's the imagery that's described in these texts. The way that order comes out of chaos is these branching paths and ways. They're not fixed. They're kind of relational and experimental. And there's a lot more to be said, but I will leave it at that. The iterative order also, so in this is the findings from the second book. The conclusion here is that the cosmic iterative order is always destroyed when chaos is removed. Once you kill chaos, you slay the dragon, tear her body into shreds, make it into a new world, whatever this is, that it destroys the old iterative order, where things are sort of emerging from one another, being born and iterating. It destroys that and replaces it with a fixed cosmic order. So we could say, the laws of, I mean, now we, in science, like the laws of nature or whatever these things are, or God's laws, whatever those are, moral orders, they replace the iterative order. And you can see it in the texts. In the same text where chaos dies, so does the iterative order and things that are associated with the iterative order. This is an image just to crystallize all of the above. I mean, it's amazing how much similarities between all of those 12 texts are at work here that can be put into like an image. All of this is like almost every one of these cosmogonies. This is the thing that's going on. You have waters, right? The waters that are moving around in fluid, and then they produce a kind of vortical spiral. It rises up into a mound, right? The holy mountain. I have it. Primordial waters, holy mountain, sacred mound, whatever that is. And then out of the mound is the world tree, the tree that comes up and grows. And so the cosmic order is this, like, this is the way that the cosmos is structured. Like, for real, around the world, these are texts that are independent of one another. They're not, some of them are communicating, but most of them aren't. These are the same stories across thousands of years of human history around the world. They're like, you know what? This is how it is. This is how it is everywhere. And why is this so obvious? Well, I mean, it's from our perspective, we're like, this is crazy. There must be some kind of universal structure of human consciousness or some Jungian whatever. Like mythologists have all these great reasons to explain away why all humans have come to this conclusion, more or less, in the oldest world texts. Or you could just say, if you just looked around at the freaking world, like this is actually what is going on every scale. Like there's fluid indeterminate processes that emerge and stabilize into metastable mounds and then branch out into patterns. Like branches and spirals are just everywhere. And when you get the combination, it's just perfect. Like spiral branching structures like lotuses, trees, they're amazing. Okay, so I'm just throwing out some words here, but I'll show you in a second these words on the slide. Spiral genesis. But spirals are great. I mean, well, whatever. Dorian knows this. Like we all know this. Like, they're great gradient reducers. I mean, you have a high gradient from like, a high concentration to low concentration. What's the best way? Shake a bottle of water and it just forms this natural spiral. It's awesome. Like I have one of those bottles. Yeah, totally. The tornado in the bottle. And like I always, like every class, I don't care what it's about. I'm like, okay, we're gonna learn about Marx. First, I need you to pass around this bottle and turn it upside down and just really wonder why the fuck that's happening to you right now. Like, and they're just like, wow, if you realize that that's like crazy, why would it form a spiral? Just like you shake it, right? Like just shake the thing. And it's like, and it just goes down. Like, why? Why is that the case? It has to do with entropy. It has to do with gradient reductions. But like, they already knew that. This was already known. Like we're just like reinventing the wheel, rediscovering really obvious things about the world, that it's branching, that it's entropic, it's spreading out. It was born and it's dying. I mean, that's another way of saying entropy, more or less, is that the world was born and it's dying. But as it's dying, it's also making, yeah.
And that picture, there's a spiral bigger at the bottom. It says that the energy is coming from the earth and going upwards. The opposite direction of the coming on the bottom.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, this one's not. You're pushing the limits of the image, Dory. Like every diagram has its limits, right, John?
No.
No, this is my crappy hand-drawn spiral. I don't even know what that is because the spiral's not accurate to the anyway. Yeah, because it would be logarithmic, but logarithmic spirals are really good instances of iteration. It repeats but differential. Like the Archimedean spiral is like perfect. But the logarithmic one is really great because you can see that it's some novelty is happening to it. And then when this happens, you're just like, I don't even know what kind of indeterminacy is structuring that madness. Okay. Right. So these images, and these are all images from the texts. All right, let's talk about the names really quick. Oh, we might make it, Joel. We might make this. I gave this talk only once before, and Joel heard it, but I totally ran out of, like, I just didn't realize how long this was going to take. So I'm like moving faster, hopefully. Yeah, but I don't want to go over my 50 minutes. And this is like news. This is only the second time I've ever presented this material. Like none of this is published. So yeah, feedback. Welcome. Okay, so these are the words. For whatever they might mean to you. These are the words, the names of order. So when order comes out of chaos and the cosmos is generated, there's a name for that. Sometimes it's like a god or goddess. Sometimes it's not. In the case of the Egyptian Ma'at, maybe you know Ma'at. I know it's hard. It's like when we talk about European stuff, we're like, oh yeah, I know, I read all that stuff. But this is like, I don't know what you're talking about, Thomas. These words are like, don't make sense. Okay, but anyway, the Egyptian goddess Ma'at, I won't go into it. But anyway, in Sumerian, it's May, in Indian, Rita, Metis, and Tao. Just in case any of these, like, you're like, I know what that one is. I mean, you don't really know what these are, so let's not pretend that we know what these are. I mean, these are crazy words these are absolutely awesome. These are the words that you get that you're like, you'll never figure out what this thing is. But the text gives all these instances and it does a million things, but you never know what it is. And that's just really, I like that. There's an imminence of the play of orality in oral cultures where like this word can just work in all these ways, but you never, like, it just keeps going. It can always take on new meaning. Okay, but in case any of these words mean anything to you, you can understand the others by contrast. This one's really great, Kurjava. This is the Finnish word that's, it's very akin to poikilos. in Greek, if you know this word, really awesome Greek word, poikilos or daidalos or something like that. It's very like used in very similar ways. And also there's a lot of connection between Metis and Nawal. I mean, they're all doing more or less the same things, but there's some regional character to them. Like the trickery, like Nawal is in the Mayan tradition has this like this great kind of shape-changing trickery figure, just like Metis does, where Ma is usually not described so much as a trickster. Anyway, comparative mythology. I think that's what people would say I'm doing. I think they'd say, you're doing anthropology, you're doing comparative mythology. I mean, it's not that, but I get it. That's like where you would stick this. It wouldn't go to SPEP. It would go to like, I don't know what. Okay. Okay, so these are some other words of order. Here's what happens to that order. Those are the words of order, but they get changed. When chaos dies, order changes too. The cosmos is no longer iterative order born from chaos. Mont becomes Ta, just Ta's will. Like this is he becomes. It's not monotheism yet, but he's a transcendent god. One of the first early Egyptian transcendent gods. There's others too, Amun and Re and Aten. Like these are Aten. These are, but it becomes about like the cosmic order is like God's will. Like God now orders instead of Mot. Mot's not doing that any longer. It's subject to the will of God. Garza in Sumerian, Dharma. Maybe you know Dharma in the Indian troops. Okay, so people talk a lot about Dharma, but a lot less about Rita. Why? Because they're fundamentally different things. Rita is old. That's like older Vedic tradition. And then Dharma is like, it's what happens when chaos dies and order becomes like moral fixed order. And there's a structure that's much more rigid. And then of course, this one, I mean, this is our European word here. So we can talk more about this if you know some of this text. And Joel and I have talked a lot about this, but logos and metis. Metis is the old term. Logos is what happens when metis is captured. So I'll just give you this. I think I have time to tell you this very short story. Do I? Maybe it's worth it. I will tell you this story in the short, sorry, the short version. It's because it's a good one, and it'll give a character to the because similar things happen in the rest of these stories. But maybe you know this one in Hesiod, where Metis is like the wisest god of all, right? From Hesiod. Okay, she's like the goddess of wisdom. Like nobody is more wise than Metis. I mean, that's Homer's world. That's a pretty high bar, right? And then in Hesiod has Zeus, who's like, I know I won't go through the whole marriage sequence, but he like basically like dismisses and has all these problematic women who are like more powerful, and he's like scared of them. So he's like, no, not you, not you. And then he's like, Metis, but she's too powerful. But if we swallow her, but how are we going to swallow her? Because she's too smart. She can't be tricked. But then this crazy thing happens in the text where Hesiod says, Zeus uses the logos to trick Metis, and then he captures her by swallowing her. And it's just like Homer would have never allowed that to happen. Why? Metis can't be tricked. She is the trickster. She is the trickery. Logos? What the hell is logos for Homer? It's like gathering firewood. I mean, that's what logos is, or like, there's a couple instances out of all of them where like you gather some words, but the logos is the gathering of some things. But in this text, logos becomes a way to gather and capture Metis. In other words, Zeus is only the most powerful god. And it's important to remember he only becomes the most powerful god because he essentially captured Metis, because he has her knowledge, her wisdom. And that's what gains. That's the first moment that's absolutely absurd that Hesiod inserts, is that the logos captures Metis. And then after that, it's just done. Heraclitus, Parmenides, none of them ever even remember that this happened. They just remember logos. Like, where is Metis in Heraclitus? Where is Metis in Parmenides? It's gone. The Orphic tradition, around 7th century BC, it's hard to say because it's such a mess and it's like textually unsupported in many ways. But like in the Orphic tradition, there is a memory that Metis has to basically die or be captured by a more powerful sky god. So a male powerful sky god ends up taking over this older tradition of iterative order. My point is that's one instance. We have this word logos, but if you know, logos only exists because Metis had to be captured and had to be captured by Zeus. Even though it's impossible for that to happen, it represents a worldview change. Okay, there's other words we don't have time to go into, but God, basically. After colonialism, it's just God. So we could just go God, God. I mean, so many cultures, but well, what replaces the iterative order? Just God. In almost every case, the name of the cosmic order is just God and God's will. So maybe that gives you some also reflection about what's happening in these massive transformations between we don't have time to talk about weird, but it turns out that word is like doesn't it's not even a Norse word, weird. Everybody's like, oh, the weird sisters of fate. No, that's not a real thing. Like that in Norse, that's not a real thing. That's like a projection of like a kind of Christianized Greek projection of those things onto Norse. There we go. Okay, final slide. I'm gonna have to skip here a little bit, but I told you that meta story. Now we're out of time. See, um, the point is very quick. This is Jomon pottery. If you ever have a chance to see Japanese Jomon pottery, it's insane. Like just absolutely amazing. So iterative order is about metastability, shape changing, tricksters, parodic cosmos, as Bataille says, nature is a parody of itself. The cosmic order is about process, not fixed forms. Um, this is the thing very quickly. I know I said I'd stop at this time, but like I need 2 minutes. These are the people like Eliade and Fraser. They all say that like chaos had to, and you know this story maybe, that chaos has to be like killed by somebody else and then an order imposed. You know what I'm saying? Like the reason order exists is because like somebody slayed chaos and then they imposed order. And that's supposedly the world of ancient like mythology stories, like how the world started. Some god or hero slays chaos and then imposes order. What's that, the father? Yeah. But this is like totally not. This is like that there is a truth to that kind of story, but it's later. It's much later. Okay. The oldest stories are not that. Chaos doesn't have to be killed for order to happen. Order is born from chaos in all these texts. That's what I wanted to say. I mean, the other one is about fractals, but if you've talked to me for 5 minutes, we've probably talked about fractals. But fractals are iterative order. I mean, in some ways, like I've come to problematize the whole meaning of what a fractal is because the word fractal has taken on such a specific meaning, but the iterative order is a much larger meaning, of which fractals are one version of that. It just means like differential repetitions of things. But those can happen in lots of ways, some of which will look like what we call mid-range fractals and others won't. But I'm just going to give some very quick examples just to show you it's crazy. I just feel ridiculous even saying this. Is like we're like these like modern Europeans like trying like, did you know that lightning looks like that and like dark matter looks like that? Like, yeah, wow, the cosmos really. And it's like this was obvious to like everyone else in the world, and now we've like forgotten all of these things, and we're like, I don't know, delving into the depths of set theory and category theory and all that. I mean, I know my talk isn't very sciencey this time around, but I got to tell you that we've really forgotten a lot, and that much of science is just trying to recover some of these same things because a lot of this is all studied by scientists. Okay, so this is like a river delta. Oh God, these are bad. On mine, it looks like a river delta. This is a picture I took of the Rocky Mountains and the snow. This is the distribution of dark matter. This is, I mean, you've seen this, right? I mean, like that patchy snow. The Finns have a great word. It's called kerjava. It just describes this. That's what this means. Like it means patchy snow grass structure, but it's fractal. And then, of course, lightning branching patterns are fractal. And of course, this is the golden ratio. I mean, it's not like flowers don't really look like this, but they get pretty close to looking like this, approximate like that, like lotus flowers, they spiral. So like every 137.5 degrees put out a petal. And if you did that, I mean, mathematically, it just goes on forever. You'd never have fully overlapping petals. It could just keep going and going and going. But flowers have that. It's called like, spiral. Maybe that's my word, actually. It's phyllotaxis, but I call it spirotaxis because, it's the spiral is going around putting out the leaves, but essentially it's optimizing for energy dissipation and, chlorophyll and stuff. In any case, and this is just a little diagram I wrote to this is like an organism, like energy comes in the mouth and then and it's this huge fractal distribution. So across scales and across everything, like the iterative order, those are water crystals. But you can, yeah, it's a terrible picture, a resolution, but you can kind of see. Okay, future projects. You're just gonna have to ask me about this because this is crazy. Don't tell anybody I said this. Because this just sounds crazy, but I just say none of these words mean what you think they do, so it's okay. But you have to ask me in the Q&A because we're out of time to talk about this. But this is the next project. This is the next volumes, and this is the last slide. Birth of chaos, birth of order. So this was about indeterminacy, and this is when indeterminacy becomes iterative, where like there's a relational indeterminacy where we're indeterminate relational things build on each other and produce iterative metastabilities. But then we have these other questions about goodness. I really hate this word because it has, I mean, it sounds awful, but it's not what you think it is. Like really goodness means something different in these traditions, which is to say reciprocity. And then the birth of knowledge, and then the birth of beauty, and then this great piece of marble from Shaftesbury Avenue in London. I just saw on the street. I mean, this picture sucks, but you get a sense. It's really, imagine this, but like 10 times more awesome and crazy and intricate. Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Super. Thanks very much, Thomas. Marvelous as always. Going back to your vocabulary, but not just vocabulary, but also then you had that kind of list of recurring themes in determinacy and so on. I think it's slide 3 or 4. I was wondering about time.
Yeah.
And you have movement in there, which might be a placeholder for that. But you've got chaos homogeny, which you aren't totally wedded to. But I was wondering, was it meant to be understood, like if you think of it as the origin of or birth of chaos, as opposed to in chaos? If you think of the former, the birth of chaos, then the question is like, well, what was there before chaos?
There's no before chaos.
No,
there's no time. There's no time.
So exactly, should that be another, it's a temp?
Yeah.
Because one could argue or discuss at least that any accounts of origins is an attempt to oppose order. Even saying in the beginning there was always chaos is an ordering gesture. It's trying to kind of, you know, before, now, after. Here's the cycle, we're going to die, and so on. So it is a kind of ordering that uses chaos. There's an order or birth of chaos as opposed to the birth in chaos. So I'm just wondering, in that list, should there be a discussion of what's the understanding of time?
That's a good point. It's not something that comes up explicitly in the text, only maybe insofar as some of the exact words of indeterminacy are used. I was thinking of indeterminacy mainly in terms of indeterminate being. Like it's not non-being, it's not being, or that's just not the conversation we're having at this point in history. But I think atemporal would be one you could put on there. It's just not one that is found in the texts. But there is a discussion that time doesn't even exist until chaos gives birth to it. So the birth of chaos was not meant, it was meant as an ambiguity, which is to say the birth of chaos, meaning that chaos gives birth. You know what I'm saying? Like you could
like the birth in chaos. Chaos gives birth.
Chaos gives birth to it. Yeah. So there's a sense in which the birth of chaos, but then there's also this other, it was meant to work on other levels as well, which is like also me writing a little story about like, you know, this time that there was chaos in the world, which only makes sense from this like kind of silly European perspective. And the rest of the historical world would have been like, what are you talking about? You know, like nobody would have gone through in the same way and done this kind of big comparative mythology thing in this way. In any case, the birth of chaos is meant to be that chaos is giving birth. Yes, you're right. It's not temporal. Time and space are things that are coming out of chaos. And to your question of like, well, is that an ordering gesture to say that there was chaos? I just have, at that point, everything breaks down because so what you're saying only makes sense in the context that we normally talk about history, origins, order. You know what I'm saying? Because the other thing to keep in mind here is, although I'm giving you a very kind of formalized, scarcely kind of academic way of putting this, this is not the way these traditions, these are all hymns, songs, poems, you know, they're meant to be performative. So these stories are all performed. Chaos is not something that is posited once upon a time. Maybe I think I had to move quickly through that slide. I'm sorry. But it's not something that happens once upon a time that we posit. Chaos is something happening right now. Cosmogony is something that you perform in these stories, in these songs. When you tell the story of the birth of the cosmos, you are reenacting, you are iterating. You know what I'm saying? So the story is not a propositional truth. It is a performative thing and I know I hope this is hitting the chord. I'm hoping it's hitting with you, that it's an imminent performance of the cosmogony itself. So when you say, oh, is it a gesture of established order? No, because it's not even working at that level of propositional truth and claims about the blah, 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 blah. It's doing it.
One quick follow-up methodological
Yeah.
question. You talked about you don't want to have anything mediated through colonial recordings and interpretations, but how does that work then with oral cultures of the pre-20th century? How do you get to the oral?
I don't. I mean, I'm sad about it. Like, I mean, I'm not happy about that result. But it just became, well, I'm interested in it. It's totally really great stuff. It's just that oral traditions prior to the 20th century, like, let's just say that they're not, I mean, you're talking about ones that aren't recorded. So you're like, Thomas, what do you make of all the oral stories not recorded anywhere?
Yes.
I don't. I mean, I don't. None of us do. I mean, we don't know. And I mean there was it's like a good week where I was just really, I mean, in some ways I didn't have to work with those because nobody's got that material, but on other ways it's very sad. Like it just hit me how sad that was, that there really are so many stories that we don't have anymore. Or like whatever. Maybe Europeans don't know these stories, but like that might even be gone themselves. Like how long did those go on? Or they might have been so fundamentally changed by colonial encounters.
What's the 12? You have indigenous oral traditions as evidence, don't you?
No, these are all texts.
They're all, they have to be texts. I know that, but wouldn't they thereby be mediated by colonial filters, so to speak?
Okay, so mostly no, but some a little. So the Mayans, I mean, you're getting into a really complicated case here. No. But I mean, it's a slightly more messy, but it gets really messy on a scale from like a little messy to like crazy. I have no idea how to untangle that. It's like like Mayan and Polynesian ones. What's interesting is that there's a very close proximity between, you still have a story of like an oral tradition of chaos, barely kind of there, but hanging on, and it's still in existence. With the arrival of Europeans, the arrival of Europeans and the arrival of like a Latinized script, that then the Quiche Mayans then like take this script, put it in their own, like put their language in it, and then write their story and then hide it so it's not destroyed. But that all happens within like 100 years. And you might say, well, that's a long time. But it's, when you think about the other spectrum of things, like what do we know about Native American oral traditions? Lots of things, of course, but also it's important to know, and many indigenous scholars do note, that these things do change. I mean, 500 years plus is a lot more. And so we have lost a ton of the world's oral tradition, and I have no idea. I'm just sad about that, and I can't work with it. And oral traditions that are recorded by anthropologists, it's just a different kind of treatment. We're not dealing with primary texts in that case. Okay, yeah.
Can I observe my position?
Yeah.
Okay, when you say no one ever, am I taking you too literally? No one ever used the word physis, no one ever spoke of physis. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, so the Greek word, that word is, well, I mean, that one's got its own etymological history. What I mean is there's no concept of nature. Nobody ever uses the word nature.
The wise man who spoke of nature, which is physis, and means something that grows from the earth, literally nature, natura, is the word that was used for the pre-Socratics by Plato, by many others. They were first the physicists. They were called those who spoke of tes physeos, of physis, and then we came up with the word philosophy. I don't know.
Yeah, no. That's a good.
Issues with philosophy and physics.
No. It's a good point. But what I'm saying is that if we go back from, like, let's take a look at like 7th century BCE and before.
Yeah.
No nature.
The folk who spoke of tes physeos.
Wait, say that again.
Alexandra, the wise man who spoke of nature. That's literally the term for the early philosophers.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah.
it exists.
For them. My point is that
Okay.
No, but not for most of human history. 99% of human history, including all the way up to the wise men who spoke of food. I mean, okay.
That should deconstruct the concept of nature.
Yeah.
the spontaneity with which we use or understand it, especially in sciences and philosophy and whatever is supposed to be some sort of a rigorous investigation, we must undo whatever we think it means spontaneously. But as also a classicist and the student of Jean-Pierre Bernard, I would say that physics meant something in Greece, and I don't know.
But only at a certain time. It was an invention.
Even in the time of Aristotle, which is already
No, but I'm saying way before that. I'm talking about like 2000 BCE.
Yeah. That is how thought divorces itself from data,
Yes.
mythology, etc.,
Yes.
etc., through starting to speak of nature. So
Yes, that's it. You said it perfect. I couldn't have said that any better. That's exactly it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the question would be like,
Yeah.
does the word physis or thesis appear in Hesiod or whatever is around from
No.
the pre-Socratic? Well, none of us are native speakers of ancient Greek, so we don't really know what they actually said, but we have some records. So to the question of records, is there any like political ramifications of this theory? So I mean, it's interesting if you look at, so we do have records of civilizations where we may not have linguistic codes. And we do know there was multiple transitions. So we do know there was at different times, different places, there was a transition from the Mesolithic, Paleolithic to the Neolithic. That was a larger transition, arguably, than the transition from the Neolithic to kind of quote unquote cities, civilization, and so forth and so on. At least from the Sumerian stuff, much stuff I really know, obviously, the myths of chaos being destroyed are somewhat connected with the founding of ancient cities, the transition out of the late Neolithic. There has been arguments, although I don't know how word woo-woo they are, about if the transition from the late Neolithic to city states involved, for example, we have good evidence of this in Skara Brae and Orkneys. I don't know about the Middle East, evidence that there was more matrilineal, matriarch might be a strong word, but there are huge differences in social structure with the formation of more hierarchical cities, which were not always a positive thing. So in Sumer, there was like a population explosion afterwards. If you look at that transition in Scotland, right, which actually had cities that were like 1/3 the size of Earth, actually when that transition happened, crops collapsed and population went down very heavily. So there was, it's not always, I would say, a good transition from the standpoint of the flourishing of humanity. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Oh man, I mean, look, it's a good question. This is literally all I've been thinking about for the last 6 months. So there's no way I'm going to be able to actually tell you. I don't know.
But in the books, you go through that.
The volume three. Okay, so this is the book I'm working on. This is volume 3. It answers this in ways that I've been flipped several times of what I thought the political ramifications were. So many times it is complicated. I'm just on chapter 2 now, but there's some introductory material. But the point is, it's too big of a question to. We'll have to talk afterwards, I think, to get into this more. There's huge implications for the understandings of ethics, morality, the rise of patriarchy, the rise of the state, and different kinds of notions of kingship. Super complicated. I will say that yes, they're absolutely all tied. And I'm not gonna go into it now. And I'm not prepared to publicly defend the following argument that I have made to John in the car ride from the airport, which is that I think Indo-Europeans have played a very big role in this transition from away from chaos. But I mean away from chaos, I mean from the whole world, into transcendence. I think they may have played and that has a very political feature because their actions are historically the spread of Indo-European languages and Indo-European influence, the rise of the wheeled chariot and the horse comes with a particular kind of sky god and all kinds of other things that I've been tracking and tracing that map onto the geography and timeline of watching where, if you know where chaos dies, you know a lot of things. But it's going to take several volumes to tell you all the things that follow from that. This is like the beginnings of a big clue to why we are living in the world that we are right now, and that the rise of transcendence was the single most important, significant event in human history. Like, I really think there is human history before transcendence and after. And just like that's a big cut, and it makes just a world of difference, to the point that it is even hard for us now to understand the worlds of immanence before that. And that is why we have so many Deleuze and Laruelle. We're like, oh, what is immanence? And there's an interest in immanence, but like and like new materialism. I mean, it's such an obviously Eurocentric phrase. New materials, like new, like, okay, I guess for Europeans, material, okay, I guess part of this tradition of materialism coming out of ancient Greece, but like there would be nothing even remotely like that understanding or even of nature during this time period. You're just dealing with a completely different set of things. So even the distinction between transcendence and immanence only makes sense after transcendence. Because before transcendence, you wouldn't say, oh, it's immanent. Be like, okay, wait, compared to what? Oh, never mind. I mean, like, that's it. It doesn't, these words just break down at this point because these things haven't even come into existence. Okay, so just to be continued, let's talk afterwards about politics stuff.
Maybe I'm almost hesitant to ask actually, because maybe my question is unfair, given that you just said you want to talk about it.
No, just go ahead and ask. Maybe it's.
Nietzsche from Zarathustra.
Yeah.
And it made me like it relates directly to what you were just saying, but it's more like a question about methodology, maybe something like that. You just said that what you're examining, the materials that you're examining are mostly hymns and performative and stories and legends, et cetera, and then you're accusing Western philosophy of explaining away movement and having done away with this question of thinking chaos or having chaos. But are you comparing incommensurate things? And this comes to mind to me when I'm looking at the quote of Nietzsche's in a book where he's writing a pastiche, a very bombastic one, but a wonderful one, of like, all sorts of, like, it's in a certain genre that he writes this, right? Through a mouthpiece that's not a mouthpiece. That's Zarathustra. And so does it matter, like, is there, but I guess what I'm trying to get at is that thinking of chaos, maybe philosophy proper, whatever, like, might not be the place to look. And you've turned to Virginia Woolf, for example, right? So are you comparing corpuses of texts that are quite incommensurate, and then therefore ending up with like a sort of dualism between that before and then after, that actually might be more complex if you look at the dissident currents of certain texts or performative. I mean, I'm thinking of, Nietzsche in Zarathustra with the Dancing Star, etc., influenced people like Martha Graham, and contemporary dance, and the spiral is super important in those traditions. Does this spiral, this chaos, etc., show up in dance and what in the West, or in some dance, more not in philosophy? And are you comparing incommensurate things for the two periods? I guess that's my question.
Oh, no. The answer is complicated. I mean, I guess the short one is absolutely, because like the most incommensurate, there's no higher incommensurability than this. But the thing is, like, in these but at a level at which I'm kind of working here, which I guess is superficially comparative mythology or something like that, many of the questions that are being raised in a very general way about what it means, like, so good, true, goodness, truth, these are words that are used in these texts, these ancient texts. These are also words that are used. Words like epistemology and ontology are not used, but words like truth and goodness and beauty, these are words that are used in these texts. In some ways, we are talking about very generally the same kinds of questions, but the answers are so radically different that there is no higher incommensurability between these traditions. So yes, and that has been, both fun and also a crazy struggle to even figure out how to do this. Because the other thing too that I didn't get to here, but this is a good opportunity. That's that whole thing at the end of where, like, the equal sign between all those things. That's really hard to think. That's why it's so incommensurable, because in this world we have politics over here and, philosophy over here and science over there. Like these things have been broken apart, but there's a history to that breaking. There was a point, a really large period of time in which those were never separated. They were completely integrated. That's why aesthetics, the word, only makes sense in the context of transcendence, or the rise of this breaking off of aesthetics. Like, oh, now we're going to talk about aesthetics. And like in these texts, that would make no sense. Like now I'm going to talk about something, just about the beautiful aspect of something. It's like, or just about its quality, not its quantity, its quality, not its modality. It's, like you could distinguish between, but like that's a completely historical invention that would be that it doesn't exist. So incommensurable that like it doesn't even line up. Okay, but to the second part of your answer, and I wouldn't, but it's historical too. So if you're saying that like, oh, they're incommensurable and therefore it's not a historical change, it's 100% a historical change. But yet it is all, but it's also incommensurable, but for historical reasons and disciplinary reasons, because the emergence of disciplines is a historical emergence itself that comes out of this. The very fact that we have something called philosophy is the result of negating all the stuff that came before and pulling and breaking off something and say, the gods are dead, all hail the logos. And then, the Greek people are just like, kill that dude, and they have to kill Socrates for this because he really was a threat. He was like crazy. I mean, that stuff, okay, if Plato's right, he's just saying crazy stuff. The Greeks are like, that is ridiculous. Thousands of years of chaos and the gods, and you're going to tell me that it doesn't exist? No, you got to die because that can't live. But of course, that world we live in now is, that Plato's world in some ways. Okay, so anyway, the second question is like, what about all these other traditions that would be closer? Yes, 100%. I pretty much only teach poetry now. Like in my, variations of like poetry.
Currents within.
Exactly.
Like,
Virginia Woolf. Yeah, so that's what drew me to them. I mean, Marx is his own, like he somehow he tried to do everything in his life. And it would have been great if he would have like finished Capital Volume 3 instead of writing a 500-page book on geology. But this is what we got, he was just a madman. He's just like, he like abandoned his family, but he like wrote on everything. He's like, yeah, I got to learn everything. And everybody just knows him as like, oh, the Communist Manifesto guy. And it's like, no, he actually studied everything. He has a book on calculus and geology. Like same with Virginia Woolf. She was just amazing. I mean, she was interested in everything. We're like, oh, you mean the novelist? It's like, oh, I mean, I guess. But if you look at her notebooks, man, she studied absolutely everything, like on her own. And in many ways, like, she didn't have the benefit. She had private tutoring. Yeah. But she didn't get to go to the college. Anyway, the point, which is, I think also gives her something special too, that she didn't end up going through university. I digress. Virginia Woolf is awesome for these reasons. She's tapped into this way. And Lucretius, same thing. He's doing something really weird, a poetry about philosophy. And then usually the way people do it, they're like, just ignore the poetic crap. That's just the honey on the cup. The real stuff is the nasty tasting medicine inside the cup. Just pay attention to that. Don't pay attention to the honey. And, there's more to the honeycup thing than that, which Lucretius is really drawing on that mythological tradition, and that makes him weird for doing it. The fact that he wrote a poem is just, he's off, he's with me, we've jumped off the ship, and you're in poetry land now, and you're dealing with different kinds of performative questions. In any case, yes to all of that, and I'm just, mainly I teach less philosophy now and just a lot more poetry and mythology, because I find there's a lot more resonance and a lot more links that show you that many of these things are still kind of active, and they've got their tendrils and they appear here and there, and various, poets and artists get into that, and they see something there, even if they don't know where that came from or why they're doing it that way. The poetic tradition is linked to this, but also poetry just is the beginning of everything anyway. I mean, all the first everything was poetry. So in some ways I'm going back, and if philosophy says, well, that doesn't count, analytic philosophy, like, no, that's not a real thing. Like, yeah, philosophy is not a real thing. Okay, poetry is a real thing. And then everything branches off and fragments and distinguishes itself from poetic, performative speech and language in these traditions. But again, that goes back even further to orality. Okay.
We have to wrap up. We have only 15 minutes break and then continue with Harry is first, right? Reese is first, okay. But we have to give floor to the people in the Zoom. There is one question he has been waiting. Arnab has been waiting for a while now. Just okay, so that.
Uh, Thank you, Thomas. That was a very engaging lecture of your entire research, and like for years, in the near future, I wish I could be a humble part of it. But it's amazing actually, because I've always been fascinated by origins and origin myths and stories. My question was about dharma or logos arising from, after ta, or chaos. The thing is, since the exile age, there has been a lot of competing dharmas in my part of the world, Bodhidharma, Sanatan Dharma, and all of these. So I was wondering that these are associated with the moral order, but do they also imply a salvational order, a soteriological or salvational order?
Okay, so the first part again. So what implies a salvation order?
The moral order that emerges at the beginning of the exile age with the various kinds of dharma.
Yeah. Okay, yes. Yeah, I think I think if this is your question, that is the short answer is karma is a later, I mean, there are earlier instances of the usage of the word dharma in the Rig Veda, but it's a very minor term, and it just has to do with a kind of ritual act. Only later on, after the Rig Veda, do you get the emergence of and prevalence of the word dharma and karma. And yes, they pertain to very strict moral ritual orders that also have to do with salvation. But in the Rig Veda, the oldest parts of the Rig Veda, Rita has nothing to do with salvation. There is no salvation in the oldest text of the Rig Veda. When people die, it's just like, oh, you had a good run, all's forgiven. I mean, like, there's no judgment, there's no salvation. It's just a totally different narrative. I mean, I have articles on this if you want to see, by Sanskrit scholars who have really done a lot of work to show exactly this transition away, like the transition from a non-salvational story in the Rig Veda to the salvational story of the Upanishads and later stuff.
Yes, Thomas, it would help a lot. If you could guide me to some of these essays. I'm looking at this thing, so it would help a lot.
Sorry.
So,
Oh, it will help a lot. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Arnab, you read in Sanskrit as well?
No, Catherine. I don't read Sanskrit. I know Hindi. I can write Hindi, but the script I'm aware of, but not the semantics or the syntax. I am not aware of in Sanskrit.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, so we wrap up for this morning, this session. We can continue over coffee, and then we meet again in 15 minutes.